Are you able to come up with bluesy solos on your own guitar? Because hearing your favorite player rip a solo is great, but being able to do it on your guitar is really rewarding. And you might think that you need to learn endless scale patterns and advanced techniques to get you there. And yeah, that stuff can help, but sometimes we just need some quick wins to get us in the game. And we can dig into the theory later if that's what you're into. And you can really, truly build some amazing solos just by keeping things simple. I really believe that. So in the next few minutes, I'll show you how you can use 2 easy chord shapes to come up with a complete acoustic blues solo, one that you'll be proud to play for your family and friends. This simple framework is a great place to start creating your own solo. So let's start by making sure that we've got 2 shapes down cold. Maybe you've seen the triangle and the L shape from Tuesday Blues 457. We're going to stick with those, but now we're going to look at them a little bit differently. Instead of just chord shapes that we can strum, we're going to see them as home bases for solo parts. Plus, we're going to mix in some really useful next door notes. We're going to keep things nice and simple and focus on just a few notes so we don't get overwhelmed by the fretboard. Early on, I think that can lead to confusion and frustration. Ask me how I know this. But let's look at each shape and the next door notes that work really great for blues solos. Let's revisit our triangle shape from Tuesday Blues 457. We start with a D major, top 3 strings, and take the root note, D, on the 2nd string and drop it down to the flat 7, C in this case. And if we refinger this, we now have a D7. We know it's a D because the root is still there. We're just not playing it. And that's important because now we can move this around along the top 3 strings. And if we just kind of visualize that note on the 2nd string, 2 frets up from the one I'm holding, that's going to give us our chord name. So this is an E7. It's a very cool, movable shape. This is an A7 because there's the A. But let's go back to E7. Because I want to show you a couple of next door tones that really work well for creating simple licks and fills. First off, there's the root, the one that we just talked about. So if we've got our eye on that, we can incorporate that in our little lead lines. Perfectly good note to use. It's going to work. It's the root. So did you notice though that I got out of my chord shape? That's not required to hold the chord shape, but I'm visualizing this. I feel like I'm playing out of this shape when I'm doing this little move. And we can bring in some other next door notes on the 1st string. We can jump up a fret and play the 4th. And we can also do that classic blues sound and mix some major and minor by dropping down a fret from our chord shape on the 1st string. Right? Notice again that I'm breaking out of the position, but I'm still thinking about this. This is my frame of reference for these notes. Cool. Now we got the triangle shape down, and you can see how some really useful notes are just a fret or 2 away. Now let's move on and take a look at what we can do with the L shape. And yes, on your side of the camera it looks like a backwards L, but from behind the guitar it looks like a perfectly normal L, but it's basically this A7 shape, no matter what you call it. And we've got our root on the 3rd string here. So anywhere we move this shape, the 3rd string is going to give us our chord name. So up 2 frets, that's a B note, so we have a B7. Let's move up to E7 and find some next door notes. Well, on the 1st string, we've got our octave here. There's an E, up 2 frets from where we are on the 1st string, right? So we have the octave, and then if we drop back down, that's the flat 7. That's giving it that dominant 7th sound. And then we can even pick up and play under a bar here at this 9th fret, and we've got the major 6. Really cool tone to add a little bit of color to your lines. Then we can switch to the 2nd string. There's a B, and then we've got our A, which is the 4th, and then dropping back to the note that's already there. Now these become really usable when you use that idea of visualizing that this is sort of the anchor point for the chord, but we can get out of position and play a simple little lead line using these notes. Right? And there's a couple more. If we drop down to the third string, we can play the G note, 12th fret. That's the minor third. So then we get that minor third, major third possibility. And it's a great one to put a little blues bend on and land on your root. So from bottom to top, low to high, we've got our E. So that's the root, minor third, major third, fourth, fifth, sixth, flat 7, and octave. You can see this one gives us a lot of tones to work with. Same thing with the L shape. Perfect blues notes are right next to your familiar position. And these aren't just random notes. They're exactly what we need for classic blues phrases. Watch this. This simple little idea is really the nugget, the jumping off point for so many different things. And it's coming from this little triangle shape here in E7. E7 because there's my E. And this is our triangle shape. And I'm sliding in to the B on the third string, 4th fret, and then incorporating that D, that flat 7. Just going back and forth between those two tones before coming up to the root E, one of our next door tones. All right, so now we've got access to some bluesy notes right under your fingers. And better yet, you already know where to find these notes because they're next door to shapes that you know, that you're familiar with. So now we're going to turn these shapes into some real blues lines. Like I said earlier, creating blues licks and solos does not have to be complicated. Sometimes when we keep it simple, it's even better. So we're going to use these two shapes and these next door notes to build some pretty simple but slick sounding blues licks. The kind of licks that just work every time. You can use them as a jumping off point for longer, more developed ideas, but for now, we're going to keep things simple and we can build on it later. So let's take a look at my favorite little move that we can do from the triangle shape. So here I'm playing a lick out of the triangle shape in A. So an A7 chord, keeping in mind the A, the root note, is here. I'm using that idea of incorporating the next door notes on the first string quite a bit here. I'm sneaking up from the chord tone on the 9th fret to the 10th. Remember, that's the major third, and then the perfect 4th, which sets me up nicely for this classic blues sound of hammering up from the minor third. Remember, that's here, dropping down a fret on the first string, and just hammering up, incorporating the root, and then more of chord tones. This features one of the most classic blues sounds around, mixing minor and major sounds. Notice how it just sounds like the blues, and it really is a lot of fun to play, but don't forget that you can often incorporate some open strings in your licks. This movable shape is great, but when we pluck an open string in there, it kind of glues things together, and this works really well in the key of E. So I want to show you that. So here we're just incorporating that open first string because it's E and it can. So make sure and use those open strings and let them ring out where you can. It adds a really nice texture to your licks and phrases. Nice. Now let's put the L shape to work with a lick that works really anywhere on the fretboard. So working out of my L shape for A7 here, I'm jumping up to the octave and then down to the flat 7. Keeping in mind that even as I get out of position from the chord, I'm still thinking about that. And this is actually where I'm going to go back home to as well. Just 2 notes on the first string, followed by this little run. And then going back to this minor third, and finishing back into the root, all on the third string there. So really cool, bluesy, and simple idea to play from this L shape. It's such a good sound, and the key is to keep these moves simple at first. Don't worry about speed, don't worry about flash, just focus on making each note count and gain some comfort with them by using them in your jams. These simple moves are great go-to tools to have in your back pocket. They just plain work, and like I said, they can be the training ground for longer, more developed lines. That can come later. But now that we have these lines working, let's see how we can combine them into a solo that moves a little bit, that tells a story. Stringing random licks together, even really good ones, isn't the sound that we're going for. The blues, to me, isn't just about random licks. It's about telling a story. I feel like it always was. And we're going to use these two staple blues soloing techniques that we're going to dig into to help you build a solo that's a complete musical statement. First, let's look at the tried and true call and response. Let's revisit our E7 lick from before. Right? It feels like it could be a complete statement, but it also feels like something more needs to be said, like we're asking a question, but not necessarily answering it. So let's incorporate some different next door notes and answer it with this. So we're incorporating that minor third to major third move. There's our root, and then we're going to drop down to that flat 7, and then kind of land in our chord shape. All right? And the two together function as a bit of call and response. You play a line like asking a question and then another one that answers it. It's kind of like having a conversation, and this can take place over longer sections of music as well. But now let's have a look at something that really creates some cohesion in a solo. I like to call them callbacks. When we take a line, like say our example from earlier, and we feature it in maybe a slightly different way, like say changing the chord, we have what I think of as a callback. We're creating some familiarity with our parts, but we can play with it just a little bit, and moving it to a different chord sounds great as well. It's a great way to keep things going, but still moving along. So this is basically the same idea that we've covered just from this A7 shape here. When we bring a phrase back later, it sounds familiar to the listener, and that's good storytelling. It kind of reminds you of the journey that you're on. So start simple with this, and remember that this can be part of the glue that brings things together. And speaking of bringing things together, let's bring our next door notes around familiar chord shapes together with some storytelling and see what happens. Now you're not just playing licks, you're telling a story. And because you're using shapes that you already know, you can focus on making music instead of hunting around the fretboard for notes. Remember earlier when we used call and response to make our solos more musical and callbacks to create that sense of familiarity? There's actually one other technique that can take your blues jams to a whole new level. So click right over here to learn the one technique that builds momentum like nothing else in your blues solos. I'll see you there. Until then, practice smart and play on.